Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 66 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. Now, a couple weeks back, I did an episode on hooking our Amigas up to 15 kilohertz LCD displays. But what if you can't find a 15 kilohertz LCD display and all you have is a standard monitor with either a VGA or an HDMI input? Well, we're here to help on that today. Now, of course, we could always go with a solution like the Indivision MK2. They have an ECS version also that deinterlaces your display and allows you to display on almost any monitor, but the cost is sometimes prohibitively expensive and they're often out of stock. So what other options do we have? Now, today I'm pushing all of my displays through my new video capture box, and I'll show a picture of it right up here. I'm going to do a full episode on that. I was going to integrate it with this episode, but it would have become a very long video, and you guys know I always stick to just 10 minutes in my videos. To start things off, I'm going to be using my beautiful Amiga 1000 to do all the testing today. Just because it has a really rock-solid RGB signal, and it also happens to have a nice composite signal too. Everything will be displayed on this nice 4:3 aspect ratio Dell monitor. It's a real nice one. It only scans at 31.5 kilohertz, but it has both a VGA and a DVI connector. Now, you may be wondering, how am I going to connect all of my devices that I'm going to talk about that use HDMI to a DVI monitor? Well, with a little beauty like this. This is a little converter. I got it off of Amazon. They're like $7, all right? Hook that end up to the DVI on your monitor, plug your HDMI cable in there, and you are good to go, my friends. The signals are quite compatible. Now be aware it does not pass through any audio to the monitor using this, so you'll have to have some speakers or some other way to grab the monitor, to grab the audio from the Amiga when you use this kind of device. Now I'm going to be covering 4 different solutions today. Myself. A 5th one, the OSSC or open source scan converter, I don't actually own, so I'm having my friend Mr. Kola do an actual review on it, and another friend, Roushi, also known as Thomas the Tank Mouse on Twitter, who's provided some great capture footage from me from the OSSC, so we can take a look at what that little guy can do. Now, the first option we can do to get your image onto some kind of monitor is to go composite. Now, most Amigas have some kind of a composite output. The Amiga 1000, the 1200, and the 600 have full color composite output. The Amiga 500 and 2000 have a monochrome composite output, which is fairly useless considering our Amigas can handle 4096 colors. Surprisingly, the Amiga 1000 has an absolutely incredible composite output. Best I've seen from any computer. This happens to be just outputting on the composite right now, and it does a great job even on Workbench. Just a beautiful image. Now, for our other machines, to give them color composite output, if you have a 500 or an Amiga 2000, you'd use an adapter like the A520. Now, the A520 is absolutely mediocre. Middle of the road, bleh. Now, this is the kind of adapter you're going to use if you're going to be plugging into a television or one of the rare monitors that has composite input. But, hook it up to your TV, it's going to be fine for games. Don't spend more than $15 or $20 on one of these, though. It's just not worth it. If you want better quality, let's look at some of the other options. Now, I would give the composite solutions between a D+ and a C- on my grading scale, simply because they're a little bit blurry, a little bit smudgy. We're going to take a look at some video from it, both from the A520 and directly from the composite from the A1000, so you can see the quality difference between the two. Now, surprisingly, composite works really good on ham images like this one because it tends to anti-alias the images automatically by smudging things together, so photographs actually look really good on composite. Now let's jump right into some of the captures that I made from composite. We're going to run through a series of tests on our different solutions for upscaling. The first one is going to be using the standard A520 composite adapter. Now, this is the lowest quality one of all of them that I have, but it does the job. You'll see this is about a 732 by 480 overscanned workbench image, and it really doesn't look too bad. There's actually not really any flicker. It does a nice job of hiding the flicker. You can only see a little bit when you move the images. Now let's look at some of my test files. This first one we're looking at, we've got some fonts that vary in size from 10 points up to about 20 or 30 points up at the top in varying contrast levels. And then down below we have some small 6-point fonts in white and various colors that are kind of unreadable on here. But once we get to the bigger font sizes, you can read it, but it's really not very good. Our next image is going to be a 4096 color Ham 6 image at 362 by 480 pixels. And it does a good job with composite of blending the colors together and making it look actually fairly good. I'm actually pretty impressed with how it handles photographic images. Next, we're going to look at a nice toaster image. This is the toaster sample file, and this has been reduced to a 16 color image, and it really does a good job of showing contrast, showing some of the fine lines and fine detail of high-res modes, and this will give us a good bit of information about how each solution appears. For the sake of comparison, this is the actual built-in composite that's built into the Amiga 1000 that is so dramatically better than the A520. I think you'll find even when we move a window around, you see even less of the interlace flicker. Now let's look at some of the text. This should be pretty telling, and I think you'll agree this is actually easier to read than the A520. Look at the color text, especially at the bottom and the tiny ones. It's actually something you can make out now. We'll take a look at our Ham 6 image real quick, and again, looks lovely. They look about identical to what the A520 put out. And lastly, our toaster image. And I think you'll realize that we have some finer detail that's come out here and maybe a little bit richer color. And when you look at the actual video game zoom that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, you'll see that this composite built into the Amiga 1000 is really actually quite usable and quite good. Here I want to capture some video footage of actual gameplay using these various devices. We're using Zoom, which is one of my favorite games from the 80s that I used to play, just because it's got some, fairly decent fast motion. We'll be able to see if there's any screen tearing or any ghosting effects or anything like that. So this first one is going to be with the onboard video, the onboard composite from the Amiga 1000. So I think you'll agree that the onboard composite video from the Amiga 1000 really does not look bad at all. They do a pretty good job of keeping the colors looking good, keeping the screen looking good, and fairly, I'd say, no real ghosting, no real problems with this. Now let's switch over to the composite from the 520 adapter, the A520 adapter. Going to the A520 adapter, even on this title screen here, I think you can see a little bit more blurriness. The text is certainly less clear than it was with the onboard one. Let's take a look at gameplay. It's absolutely not unusable, but it's absolutely not as good as the onboard composite on the Amiga 1000. But again, no tearing, no real problems with ghosting, anything like that, going composite. So for game playing, perfectly usable, and also very easy to set up a capture device to capture this video. Our next product is actually really useful. This is going to use a combination of an RGB to Scart cable, much like this one right here, where you have RGB on one end and Scart on the other. Now you'll notice that the RGB end of it is a 25-pin RGB that's been cut down to 23-pin because until now 23-pin RGB connectors have been as rare as hen's teeth. But my friend Jeff Birt from Hey Birt, here's a link to his information, and my other friend Francis from RetroTink Design, the guy who did the RGB to component adapters that I'm going to be talking about. They got together after a little bit of a kerfuffle, but they got together and found a place that's going to make brand new 23-pin connectors for us. Those should be available quite soon. Now, Scart is a European standard that was used many, many years ago and is still available on some televisions in Europe, from what I understand. It's a pretty cool format, and it handles RGB to Scart really nicely. So if you're in Europe and you have a television or a monitor that has a Scart input, so if you're in Europe, all you're really going to need is one of these $15 cables from amigastore.eu, and you're in like Flynn. You just hook this right up to your TV and you'll very possibly get a really nice signal out of it. But how do we deal with newer televisions and newer monitors that use the HDMI standard? That's where this little beauty comes in. This is an HD converter, easily available on Amazon. These cost between $25 and $35 usually. Take a look at the reviews because there's a couple different manufacturers and some of them have some pretty bad quality products. But you spend $30, $35, you're going to get a good unit. You have Scart on one end, and you also have HDMI input, 5-volt power supply. On the other end, you have HDMI output. You have an audio output if you want to split out the audio and play it on something else. You have Scart HD 720 to 1080 and a PAL to NTSC switch, so you can switch between them. And what this does is this lets you use any HDMI monitor out there and get a really nice quality image from your Amiga. You can go into interlace mode, and it will, while it's not a flicker fixer, it does de-interlace the image because of how televisions understand the HDMI signal. You're going to see that on my previews here in just a second. If you have HDMI on your monitor or on your TV, this whole setup's going to cost you about 45 American dollars to be able to get an image out of any Amiga that you want to and have it a good quality image. Now, if you've only got a monitor that has DVI, get one of those $7 adapters from Amazon. Now we're up to just a hair over 50 bucks for a perfect solution. For general home use, playing games, doing stuff on Workbench, this is perfect. The image quality is not the best in the world, and I often get a little snow distortion effect that scrolls up the screen. I've tried it with 2 cables and 2 of these devices, and I still get it, but it's not usually noticeable. I can see it a little bit in my captures, so I tend to capture with a different device, but for day-to-day use, this is fine. I would give this a C+ to B- right in that range. But let's take a look at some of the video I captured with this device. Based on price and performance alone, this is using the Scart to HDMI solution. So we have a RGB to Scart cable, Scart into the little HDMI conversion box. You can see even on my interlace screen, it looks pretty good. Again, you only see any flicker when you move things around, but not bad at all. Now let's take a look at some of our images here. This is a real winner here. This comes out nice and clear. Now, I do have occasionally some white snow scrolling up the screen whenever I use my Scart to HDMI. It's not showing up right now, but every once in a while it shows up, but it's pretty subdued and it doesn't really bother me. Let's look at our Ham6 image. Looks absolutely fine, nice and bright, and the colors are pretty good. You can definitely see the individual pixels in here. It doesn't do the aliasing that we might get on some of the component solutions, which is why every once in a while a component version of like a photograph on an Amiga actually looks a little bit better because it has, it kind of blurs it and gives a little bit of aliasing. Let's look at our toaster image, 16 color toaster image. Colors bright and sharp. The images are nice and tack sharp. I don't have any reason to complain about this. Now, remember, this particular unit is like $17 for the cable, and it's like $30 for the converter box. So we're talking less than $50, and you can then hook your Amiga up to any monitor that has HDMI. Or if you only have DVI in your monitor, then you need to get a little $6 adapter that converts HDMI to DVI, and you can display it on a nice 4x3 monitor like I've been using here. This next one is going to be the Scart to HDMI solution that I spoke about. The color fidelity, a little bit washed out, just a tiny bit washed out compared to some of the other options, but perfectly acceptable. But what I do get, and I know some people don't, some people have great luck. I'm going to try and zoom in and see if we can see any of it. Every now and again you see some little white ghosty dots coming up the screen. Here they come right up here. There they go again. And I see that on everything with this adapter, and I've used 2 different Scart cables and 2 different adapters, and I get the same thing. It's not enough to really cause a problem, but when you're trying to capture a game, you want to get it as high quality as you can. So we'll do a little bit of gameplay here. You can see that the color fidelity is okay. The picture quality is just fine. For basic use, I would say that this is a perfectly valid solution for playing games on your Amiga, the Scart to HDMI adapter. Now we're going to move on to a few devices that I've actually covered and reviewed before. The Amiga RGB to Component interface is made by Francis from retrocentric.com. This is a great little device, and this will allow you to hook your Amiga straight up to a TV or even a monitor that has component inputs, the split red, green, and blue. The red, green, and blue connectors that you see right there. Now, not all televisions can handle the 240i signal that comes out of an Amiga. So if your television or monitor can't support it, we need some way to adapt it. Enter the GBS 8220 upscaler. Now, this is often used for arcade games, for people to take arcade boards and upscale the image so they work on an LCD monitor. I did a review on this little guy early last year, and it was absolutely mediocre. I had my own RGB cable that I built that connected to these little inputs here, and the quality was marginal at best. I would give it a C-. It did okay. But notice this has the component inputs just like Francis's unit. So what happens if we hook these little guys up together? Well, the good news is Francis thought of that, and he outputs a signal from his little device that the GBS 8220 understands really, really nicely. It gives you a clean signal, it gives you a very, very colorful signal, and it gives you a rock solid signal. I mean, this is just pure rock solid flicker fixing right here. You can set up an interlace screen, use it all day long. Now, the awesome thing is the GBS 8220 is still available on Amazon for like $28. They range from $25 to $35, so average about $28, and they work really well. So you've got your $50 connector here from Francis, you got your $28 here, you're just a hair above $75, about $80, and you have a rock solid flicker fixer. Now, it's not without its faults, as you're going to see on my video here in just a second. Sometimes the mouse pointer gets this little halo or ghosting around it, and as you're moving it around the screen you can see it. Now, it actually shows up more on my video capture than it does to the naked eye, probably about twice as obvious on the video capture it is to the naked eye, but it is there. So I'd take a few points off for that. I would still, considering the price and considering the rock solid display, give this a solid B- for this combo. It works really well. Let's take a look at the video. Now here we have an excellent solution. This is the RGB to component that goes into the GBS 8220, And the way that Francis has designed this is it boosts the signal so nicely that it actually gives you a good quality image from the GBBS 8220. Now, if you've seen my previous video on this, you know that it has been mediocre quality at best. But now we're actually good quality. Here's our interlace screen again. Now, you can see, if you look over the folders, there is a little bit of this strange corruption that occurs with the GBS 8220 when it deals with some sprites, like the cursor. You get this strange ghosting, and I get that all the time no matter what. But you get over it pretty quickly, and it doesn't really show up in games. Let's look at some of our text. Now, one of the interesting things about this is, in order to capture it, I have to go through an extra level of conversion. I have to go VGA out from the GBS 8220 into a VGA to HDMI converter to get it to capture. But even with that extra level of conversion, the quality is great. If you look at the text here, it's bright and sharp and crisp, and the color quality, the fidelity of the colors is just fantastic. Let's take a look at our Ham 6 image. Now, that looks really high contrast to me. As a matter of fact, that it actually looks a little bit more pixelated than some of the others, which could be the result of it being an actual sharper image. But I almost like the image quality of the Ham 6 image when it goes through the RetroTink. Let's take a look at our toaster image. Again, bright, sharp, vibrant colors. This thing just kicks the colors into overdrive here. Is it too much? I don't know. I mean, you can adjust the contrast settings on the GBS 8220, and you can reduce the brightness and the contrast. And maybe if I fiddled with that a little bit, we could get a little better quality image. But this is just plain gorgeous. And the workbench screen is bright and sharp and crisp and readable. And I would say this is an incredibly nice quality, under $100 solution that will let you plug into virtually any monitor in existence. Now we're looking at the component, the Amiga RGB component going to the GBS 8220. And again, like I mentioned before, the quality of this is superb. I've never been a huge fan of the GBS 8220 when you go directly RGB into it, but this component into it is phenomenal. The picture quality is great. The color fidelity, it picks up the colors just great. And I'm not experiencing any lag, any latency, or any ghosting at all with this solution. I'm thinking that this is a pretty good deal for under $100. So not too shabby, right? But can we do even a little bit better? Sure we can. I did a review on the RetroTink 2 last year. I'll link to that video in the description too. It's a great device. It has component inputs. It has composite inputs. It has S-video inputs right here, and it also has audio inputs, and it will upscale every signal it gets. So it'll handle the 240i image from this adapter and the Amiga and upscale it and output it to any HDMI device that you throw at it. It also has some cool features like being able to soften the image, anti-alias the image. That looks good with some 8-bit computers. This is great because it works with both my 8-bit and my Amiga machines, so I'm very happy with this. I would say this is easily as good quality as the OSSC can output from what I've seen. It does a great job with colors, does a great job fixing the flicker, and it does a nice job of, not having any latency. Everything just appears great. The added bonus of it working with a bunch of 8-bit equipment with these connectors on here just sweetens the deal a little bit. I would give this solution an A-. Now you're going to pay $100 for this, and you're going to spend $50 on this. So we're talking about $150, which is getting up in the price range of the OSSC. So at this point, you have to look at the advantages of both of them and disadvantages of both of them and make a decision which one's better. Just weigh it. I happen to have this already, so this was a no-brainer for me. I thought, hey, great, this will be perfect. And I've never been happier. If I had just gotten the OSSC, I'd probably be perfectly happy too. So I would rate this an A- easily. But let's take a look and you can judge for yourself what you think. The RGB to component adapter, and that's going through the RetroTink 2 and then into HDMI. And I think that you'll agree that this is a nice sharp image. Again, the only time you'll see interlace is when you move fine objects around like this, and when it redraws you can see just the faintest bit of flicker, but once everything's still it looks absolutely perfect. Let's take a look at some of the images. First, the text. Now everything is brighter and sharper and clearer. I think you'll notice the contrast is dramatically better than the component, and this is all perfectly readable. Even under the fine text, the 6-point text, you can actually see that and read that, and it's really not too bad. The color text is lovely. Now we'll jump over into our Ham 6 image. And I don't see anything to complain about there. It actually looks really good, really good. The dithering is nice, and I don't have any complaints about the quality of that Ham 6 image. Now let's jump right into our video toaster image. Again, a 16 color high resolution image, and look how those colors pop. Those really, really pop much harder, much brighter. The blacks are a little blacker than what we had when we were looking at our composite images. So I'd say this looks pretty darn fantastic. Now we're looking at the RGB to component adapter going through the RetroTink. The richness of the colors is not quite the same as it was going from the RGB to component into the GBS 8220, but the quality is perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable, no issues at all. The lag, I don't notice any lag, I don't notice any latency to speak of on the games, so really not too bad at all. Maybe the contrast is not quite what I would like it to be, but that's okay, it still looks really good. So now we've covered the various interfaces I use on my Amigas to get them to display on a 31.5 kilohertz monitor. I'm happy with all of them. I use all of them. I even use the composite from the A520 every now and again to slap it on my, say, Amiga 4000 if I need to just pump out some traditional AGA real quick. Works just fine. But we have yet to talk about the OSSC. So here's my friend, Mr. Kola, who streams on Twitch, and you need to subscribe to him. Here's his link right down here. And I'll also have some footage from my friend Roushi, who was kind enough to send me some footage from a couple of games. Let's take a look at their reviews.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who might not know me, my name's Mr. Kola, and I'm a retro game variety streamer over on Twitch. I stream everything from Amiga to Commodore 64 to old PC stuff, old consoles as well, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx 16, even a little ZX Spectrum from time to time. But Doug asked me to do a quick little mini review for him on a device that I own, and it's this device right here, which you may have heard about, the open source scan converter, also known as the OSSC for short. This device has been very, very helpful for me with its multiple inputs. It's got everything from VGA to component, and of course, the big one for Amiga is Scart, which is that's how I get my video out from the Amiga to the open source scan converter, which then goes to my capture card, which is how people see the games that I'm playing while I'm streaming. Over the past year or so that I've owned this device, I've been very happy with my purchase. It offers pretty great image quality, which is, of course, a positive for my streaming. It also has very low latency, so if I want to use this to play my Amiga using a flat panel display or a modern display, I don't have to worry about a bunch of input lag ruining my gameplay. Of course, there's some other scalers on the market, which I will touch on in a little bit, that have some variable input lag, and that's definitely an issue with them. It also works with a variety of sources, which for me, using multiple different systems, has been very helpful. There's multiple different scaling modes. There's line doubling, line tripling, line quadrupling, even a line 5x mode, depending on what you're trying to scale up. And of course, the firmware is also updatable, and this is a open source project that is being currently maintained, and there's a big community around it. So there's all sorts of different support if you do end up needing it. Of course, there's some negatives to the OSSC. The biggest one for most people being price. For a good majority of its life, the OSSC was hovering around the $160 mark. We're a bit closer to $120 from Video Game Perfection, who people tend to view as the official version of the OSSC to get. There are some cheaper models from different manufacturers that you can get for a little bit less money, but quality might vary for you depending on which one you pick up. I will say that the one that I own is one and such knockoff that I bought on AliExpress, but it's been just as good as the ones from Video Game Perfection. Of course, another con with this is that it only accepts RGB inputs. So if you want to use composite or S-video or even RF or something like that, you're going to have to look at a different device. One such device would be the RetroTink 2X, which is also awesome. So that's another con. Another con is that capture cards and televisions can also be a little bit fussy with what this puts out, depending on what resolution you're trying to either double, triple, or quadruple. There's basically, because it's just line doubling or line tripling, you're going to get some oddball resolutions. I saw one earlier when I was line tripling the Amiga that was like 1280 by 864. Something that a lot of displays or capture cards might not understand. So oftentimes I'm limited to the 2x or 3x modes when I'm capturing for Twitch. But of course, depending on your television and depending on your capture card, your mileage will vary on that point. Overall, I'm very happy with the OSSC. It's been a big upgrade over the other scaler that I had, and just gives me a ton of utility to stream various different consoles. If you're thinking about picking one up, I can wholeheartedly recommend one. And that's pretty much it from me. Back to Doug.
Well, those look just lovely, if you ask me. The OSSC is really a nice device, and it's kind of a standard device for a lot of people who do streaming. Now, he mentions he can find them for $120. I've never seen them that cheap. I've always seen them around the $175 to $200 price range for a good quality one. I don't know about the no-name one some guy makes in his garage. I'd prefer to buy one that has, a little bit of a reputation. So what are my final opinions on this? Well, if you're deciding you want to stream or create YouTube videos, and we invite you to join the club, it's a fun club, I would say the OSSC or the combination of the RGB to component and RetroTink would do fantastic for anything you need. Then either of those two devices make it so easy to get your signal into a capture device or into OBS on your computer. You're not going to have any problems with either device, and you're going to drop between $150 and $200 for that kind of solution. If you're just doing gaming and maybe a little bit on Workbench, you can't beat the $45 price tag of the Scart cable and the Scart to HDMI upscaler. You just can't beat it, and it works great. It's not the highest quality video you're ever going to see in the world, but it's $45 and it solves virtually all your problems. So go with that if you just do some occasional stuff on your Amiga. If you plan on using your Amiga for productivity like I do, I'm so happy with my RetroTink solution with my component cables. It works fantastic. I'm also thrilled with my RGB component and my GBS 8220. I have that hooked up on my Amiga 2000 full time when I use the toaster, because it lets me use the toaster's preview screen in an absolute rock solid display at 31.5 kilohertz. Normally when you're looking at the preview, it's going to be an interlaced display and flickery, but man, this thing just gives me a rock solid display. Works perfect. Quality is great. The flicker fixing is just fantastic. All the links to all of these projects are going to be in the description, so you're going to be able to find everything right in the description. Now, some of them, honestly, are links to the Amazon United States product, because that's where I'm at, but you can take a look at it and find the same product from your version of Amazon or wherever you buy your products from. Now, I would not be able to do any of this without my good friends who support me on Patreon, just like you can. I've got tiers ranging from $2, $5, $10, $25, with various rewards for each one. And my rewards are going to be coming out soon, and I'll be posting some images of that. If you'd like to get involved and see how you can help me, please take a look at my website, www.patreon.com/10mark. That'll take you to my little portion of Patreon. But for now, let's say thank you to all these people you see scrolling by right now. Thanks, everybody. You guys are awesome. So thank you for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please comment below and let me know how you connect your Amiga to your modern monitor. I'd love to hear about that. But until next time, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, trying to sort through 8 million miles of cables and figure out where all of these things are supposed to go on my various devices. Signing out.